Hello, everyone. In the next installment of our series about AI and security, I'm joined by David. David, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dave Marsyla. I'm the VP of Engineering here at Trustero. I've been with Trustero for the past year, helping to build out our AI infrastructure, and most recently, our newly announced multi-agent agentic workflow functionality as part of our Trustero Intelligence feature. So.
To David. So David is the guy who is responsible for the magic behind all of those things that you see in the product. So David, let's start with something simple. What is agentic AI?
Yeah, I mean, agentic AI, and this is really a big upgrade in our traditional Trustero Intelligence interface, which is kind of, if you're familiar with the product, it's sort of our chat-based interface, which allows you to ask questions against all sorts of different types of GRC content. And this is really a big upgrade into making AI much more autonomous, making it instead of just a simple question and a simple response looking at content. Agentic AI can make its own decisions about how it wants to proceed to solve a particular problem. It can do this through multiple steps, through multiple sub-agents, and through tool calls, agentic reg queries, all sorts of different stuff. And they can use feedback loops and other interactive communication with a user to complete a particular task. And in fact, one of the things that we've released with this new set of functionality is something we're calling the policy design assessment. It's a very complex sort of agentic multi-step workflow, which not only kind of breaks the problem of how would you analyze your policies against a compliance framework or against a government regulation. It not only looks at like how to break that process down, but has multiple steps where it asks more questions and feedback from the user in order to make sure it's doing the right thing. It's selecting the right framework, selecting the right policies. And so it breaks it down into a series of about 15 different steps in order to kind of complete the process and generate a final report for it. And so that's one of the key features that we're highlighting as part of this release.
Okay, so you kind of open the door for multi-agents.
Yes.
It's a lot of talking. Even OpenAI yesterday announced their multi-agent platform. We already have multi-agents in the product. So can you talk a little bit more about what is the difference between having like a single agent, even though it's an agent, it's active, it's not just answering questions, but actually does work, but also kind of have multiple of them? Because to me, it sounds like a team of experts, like each one in their own space, and they kind of divvy up the work and they do the work.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, one of the key things we're trying to do is break down these problems, especially problems around GRC content, analyzing GRC frameworks and other things. We're trying to break these down into smaller problems. And then we create these smaller individual agents that kind of know how to solve one piece of a problem. And then from a higher level, when you have a multi-agent agentic workflow, you have a high-level planning agent. And that planning agent starts off the whole process, and you'll see this if you use Trustero Intelligence. The first thing that'll happen is you'll see it planning and you'll see it come up with a plan of what it's going to do. And it actually comes out with a nice summary.
Like your project manager.
Yeah, exactly. Like here's what I'm going to do. Here's all the agents I'm going to pull in, and I'm going to hand different parts of the problem to them. And so we try to break these problems down into smaller, more manageable pieces. The planner agent kind of fits them all together and then steps through, sometimes they're predefined workflows like the policy design assessment. Mostly they're just free-form workflows. It's just looking at what tools and what agents it has in order to execute its plan. And then it just kind of steps through the plan and gets the output from one agent, as the input to the next, and then summarizes output from multiple agents and eventually comes up with an answer to a more complex problem.
So what is the benefit of using this team of agents versus one kind of a super agent like we used to do?
Yeah, I mean, the real benefit is that it allows us to solve problems we haven't even thought of. So we're really giving the planner access to kind of low-level raw information. So, here's your list of controls. Here's the last analysis you've done of your controls. Here's all of your policies. Here's your evidence in the system. And we give it access to all of these different things. And then when you ask complex questions or ask a question about your own content, we're really letting the agent come up with a completely unique solution that fits your problem. And so it can solve problems that we haven't even thought of yet. And also one of the real benefits to us internally is that we can add more functionality into the product much more quickly. Agents are relatively easy to build. I mean, this new framework from OpenAI is one way to do it. We actually chose to build our system on top of LangGraph, which is a nice open source platform for building agentic workflows. But that allows us to very quickly develop these new agents, add them into the system, add new functionality, and solve even more problems for our GRC clients.
So if I understand it correctly, each of those agents is an expert in a certain task. Like this agent knows how to answer questions. This agent knows how to interpret requirements from a document. This agent knows how to test control, this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
And if you need new capability, then basically you build a new agent.
Yes.
So you're becoming kind of like the HR department. I need this kind of a person and go and hire for me.
Yeah, the only challenge really is figuring out like the best order to build these things in, and we have several people who are working on like build this one next, build this one next. But yeah, we're very quickly iterating and building new sets of functionality, and so you'll see we really just released kind of the underlying framework with some really key example agents that we've developed, and now you'll see very quickly us iterating on adding new functionality in weekly or monthly basis. So you'll see new stuff coming out very rapidly now.
So what is can you talk a little bit more about the framework of developing those agents? Because it seems like they're experts in deep expert in a narrow field, right? And I can come up with a benefit, like probably they're more accurate in what they're doing because they're not over contextualized, and you can really focus on how you prompt engineer those agents. But can you talk a little bit more about how you build those agents? What is the philosophy, the framework?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, we do try to make them, smaller components. So you want to try not to build an agent that's too large, that's doing too many things, because you want the planner to be able to use that smaller component in various types of scenarios. So that's kind of one thing. Keep them small, keep them focused on one particular type of problem. And with agents, they're really a combination. Sometimes there's custom code in there. In fact, a lot of times there's custom code to access particular parts of data from the system. There's also prompts and sort of ways that you kind of manipulate the agent and tell it how to interpret the information that it's looking at and what types of data formats to use. Some of our agents actually need interaction from the client, and so the person who's using the system. And so this is something that is sometimes unusual in these agents. We've actually added a very rich set of interactivities. So we actually have certain types of artifacts that agents can generate. Can display those artifacts, reports, and other things to the user of the system, can ask for feedback at certain parts of the workflow process. And that feedback can be more interactive and visual. So we've added a little bit of a combination of backend functionality, which is sort of the pure agent, and then front-end functionality to kind of make the experience richer when the person's using the system.
And of course, I have to throw in my security angle here. Which is that when you have those agents, multi-agents, we can be very particular about the access level that the agent has, the identity that it has, all of those things, which as opposed to using one Uber agent, then that agent has to have access to everything, and then you don't know exactly what is going to happen. Whereas with this one, I can say, yeah, you know what, you just need to answer questionnaires, so you need to have access only to this particular piece of data, and that's it.
Yeah, I should have included that part of what agents sort of inherit when they're running is they get sort of the context of the current session. And so, and that's partly defined by like what information you want to give the agents as part of your question, and then also your security level.
Right.
And which things you actually have access to in the project. So if there's areas of the product that you don't have access to, that information just won't be available to those agents. And so it kind of inherits that model as well. But yeah, a big part of what an agent does is it does kind of restrict the context of what it's looking at, so it can be more accurate. So yeah, if it knows it's supposed to be processing evidence, it's not going to look at policies. It'll ignore that.
And we can actually restrict it not to look at policies.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so that is super interesting. Can we kind of open the hood? Because we kind of actually started doing.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Let's completely open the hood and let's talk more about our architecture. So we sit on top of AWS. We are in AWS East on the commercial side. That's where our computing is. That's where our storage is. So can you open up a little bit more about how we do computing, how we do storage, how do we segregate between tenants?
Yeah, sure. So right, we're running everything on AWS right now, and we've looked at other platforms, but AWS seems to fit our needs the best. We have multiple different types of servers that we have running that are interacting with each other. in our core infrastructure. Of course, we have staging and testing environments as well that are replicas of that. And then a lot of our data management is done through AWS S3 buckets. So all the data that we bring into our system is brought into the system and is stored internally with AWS as well. And then another big part of our system, really kind of going under the covers, we actually have implemented a fairly complex indexing system for processing and indexing GRC content. And that's really what empowers a lot of our AI and agentic functionality.
And we have some patents there as well.
Yeah, there are some patents in progress there as well. And really that system is meant. We understand a lot about GRC content. We understand a lot about how it's structured, how the data is organized, how it relates to each other, and that gives us a really good ability to when questions are asked, when our AI agents are actually running, like we know what data to bring in, and we're able to use our indexing system to find exactly the right data. That's really a key thing with any sort of LLM processing right now is making sure you bring the right data in at the right time. So a big focus, really most of what the team does is really trying to get the right information at the right time to the different agents that are running and processing data, whether it's trying to execute like an operating effectiveness check, or whether it's doing a higher level design analysis. It's all about getting the right information to the agents at the right time.
And we have, for example, Trustero graph, which not only the right data, but also the linkages between the data is super important because you're creating this multidimensional array that allow us to kind of look at the vectors and figure out how do we correlate the data.
Yeah, there's some really some sort of complex stuff. A lot of the interesting theory behind the way AI is working nowadays. Is the techniques that you use to try to find the right information. We end up creating a lot of it is in how we process the documents initially. We'll store references to these documents in our vector database, which is really one of the key pieces of functionality that's emerged through AI in order to find similarity of evidence. Because one of the main things you do is you can only give so much evidence to AI when it's going to, when it's going to do some processing. And so a real part of the art is to really narrow down, make sure you find the right evidence, make sure you find the closest match to what the question is or the process that you're trying to implement, and make sure that you get just that information to the language model. And then the more accurate and the more focused the information it gets, the better a job that it does. And we actually use a variety of different models in the product. We're mostly standardized on OpenAI, but we do kind of pick and choose for different parts of the system which model gets executed for that particular part. In fact, for the agentic planning, we have 3 different models that are kind of running different parts of
from OpenAI.
Yeah, they're different ones from OpenAI to meet different sort of needs, performance and functionality, and then in depth of reasoning. So,
but also I'm getting that there is a lot of computing happening before we make the calls to the large language model from.
Right, exactly. Because a big part of it is finding the right information to provide in the first place. So that kind of happens searching through our vector databases, finding the correlations with the information with the types of questions you run. We even do things. We go through multiple phases when we're processing AI. Like we'll actually, look back at your entire conversation and re-summarize that to make sure we're getting the right context in place. Because sometimes you might ask a follow-up question like, oh, do that again, or try that again, which on its own doesn't really mean anything. So you kind of have to be able to look back at the chat history and look back at what's happening in order to actually rephrase that as, oh, try again this thing, and then generate the actual final
question. Okay, so
that a lot of pre-processing is happening, and then planning, and then execution steps.
So that for example helps go around the relatively small contextual window, because in the GRC we work with a lot of documents, and for example, if you use something like ChatGPT or Notebook LM, you start bumping into the contextual window. Whereas in our case, we in a way extend the contextual window because we do this pre-processing.
That's right. Yeah, I mean that's really that's kind of the art of AI now, is really finding the best way to get the right information to the language models, and then pick the right language model that knows how to handle the kind of complex questions that are being asked.
Okay. So can you that's super interesting actually. Can you talk a little bit more about our development practices? Because SDOC, like again, I'm throwing in my security here. But how do we develop code? How do we make sure that the code is secure? How do we monitor the environment to make sure that everything is working as expected?
Sure, sure. Yeah, first of all, just maybe a little bit about our team. The team is divided into kind of three different sets of functions. We have a receptors team, which is really responsible for data integration with third-party systems. And that's a big part of what we try to offer as the Trustero product is being able to tap into a wide variety of systems. We have well over 50 connectors to different systems. And then we have, that's just for evidence collection. And then we also have workflow integrations with things like Jira and ServiceNow, where we can collect evidence from those systems from triggered workflows. We have integrations with GRC platforms
Like
as well,
Archer.
like Archer and so we're actually just constantly building these new connectors.
Can I dive a little bit deeper on this one? Because there are a lot of GRC systems that actually connect and pull evidence. However, the distinguishing factor here with us is that we do some pre-processing. It's not just like, yes, give me that evidence, is directly connected to that control. But once we pull the evidence, we automatically assign it to the control based on this pre-processing and calls to the LLM that you were just describing.
Yeah, exactly. We have and in fact, one of the things you'll see coming out with the product in the near future, we're putting a lot more focus on really expanding our abilities for evidence collection and evidence modeling.
Yeah.
Because one thing you see in the GRC space is, evidence is not just a document. It can be, multiple. What's the best way to phrase it? It can be like multiple pieces of evidence, which is really. Sorry.
Different artifacts.
Yeah, different artifact. So evidence can really be like multiple pieces of evidence that are bundled together to indicate that something happened. Like it could be your weekly notes from meetings. It could be your quarterly review of something. And that all kind of bundles into a piece of evidence. And so we've taken a really interesting approach where we have not just sort of flat evidence that gets loaded into the system, but we actually have the ability to sort of stack evidence over time and keep multiple copies of evidence and keep full history of all of the evidence that's been collected and have that all sort of modeled in our system so that you can, depending on what type of information you're trying to collect, you can model it in different ways and have the AI analyze it, not just as a single data point, but as a set of data that is.
And another example is, for instance, our receptor for AWS. We have one receptor for AWS that pulls everything from there. I don't have a separate receptor for logs, separate receptor for configurations. We pull everything, and then the AI figures out, okay, that evidence coming from AWS for this control, that evidence for that control.
That's right. We spent a lot of time figuring out the best way to bring in evidence from these different receptors and bring them into our system, and then how to map them to the controls in your project. And we're actually adding more and more AI functionality around that to make that mapping process even more efficient in the coming months.
And the SDK that we have, like, for example, you have a system that we never heard of.
Yeah.
You still have the SDK, but the SDK also uses the AI on the back end, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we do have an open SDK. So, and we have had a couple of customers build their own integrations into our system where they're pulling information from some system we don't already have an adapter for. But you can use our open SDK. Run your own receptor, your own evidence collection. It comes into our system. We go through the same sort of processing. We'll find out if that evidence has changed. We'll track it over time. We'll index all that for AI processing, and we'll put that into our system. And then when we're going to use that information to analyze a particular control or to do some other type of analysis, then we'll pull that information back, only the relevant pieces of it, and then use that to process the control test procedures.
Awesome. So going back to the original, so we have the receptors team.
Right. So receptors team, and then we have a team which is solely dedicated to, we call it our NLP team, but they really are our core AI team, solely dedicated to building all of this AI agentic functionality. And those guys, they're always trying to pioneer new things. They spend half their time just doing research on new topics, and the other half of the time actually bringing those into the product. And then lastly, we have our apps team, which is kind of our full stack development team, and they kind of build the front end of the product. Yeah, they build the front of the product, but they're actually involved at all levels of development, and so they're getting involved in some of the back end, AI, open AI calls and things like that for various types of functionalities. So
I would assume that the NLM folks are pretty good at Python, prompt engineering, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. That team primarily works in Python. We have a middle tier, which is written in Golang, which does a lot of our kind of heavy lifting with the database and data processing at that layer. But yeah, a lot of the backend is all written in Python.
And the database that we use?
We use a couple. We use MySQL for just a lot of the basic metadata and project information. And then we're using Postgres for all of our indexing and other functionality around the AI. So we have kind of two different systems, and we just depending on what we're trying to do, we'll kind of pick one or the other that's the most appropriate.
And can you talk a little bit about the development train, like how we do releases?
Yeah. So I mean, one nice thing is we really automated a lot of our infrastructure. So when we're deploying products or doing releases, it's sort of a very simple process because everything has been fully automated, including a very detailed testing suite. So we basically will just label a release from our main branch. We'll say, okay, this thing needs to go to testing or staging or production. It's automatically going to run through a full suite of tests. It's automatically going to run, and it's going to automatically get deployed and restart those systems and push the release out and relaunch all of the servers in the correct order for that release. So that's one really nice thing. We don't actually have a dedicated IT ops staff.
Right.
We kind of take that responsibility in the development team kind of on a rotating basis. And we just make sure that everything is completely automated. That just makes our process much more efficient. And as far as, keeping track of vulnerabilities and things like that, every check-in into the system is reviewed by at least one other person, a lot of times multiple people. We have ongoing design reviews. So every time a new feature is coming out into the product, we'll do a security design review, a vulnerability design review, to just kind of make sure we're covering all of our bases, that we're not adding some more risk into the system. And then, of course, on an ongoing basis, and you're with me, George, you get to sit with my team once a week and kind of help oversee our general vulnerability analysis. So every week we're sitting down, we're looking at potential threats that have come in, potential vulnerabilities, trying to respond to
major changes in the architecture that we need to review.
Any sort of architectural changes we're reviewing. And this is a big part of our own, of course, our ISO 27001 certification itself. That's a part of it, is to make sure we're doing that on an ongoing basis.
I hope I'm not getting into more secretive space. Do we use any AI in the testing?
No, we don't currently. We've looked at this a bit. We do use AI quite a bit to generate our tests. So, not quite vibe coding, but when we generate our test cases, a lot of times we'll leverage heavily AI to generate artificial data and other things like that. So to be honest, a lot of our test suite is built coding using AI, but we're not actually actively running any AI in the testing. Although we have considered it, especially for some of our UI testing, because that stuff can be a little more fragile as the UI changes. So it's a little bit more annoying to maintain.
Right. Okay, so it's coming.
Yes, it is something we're.
And in terms of monitoring, we monitor of course, the web stack and the web interface, and if something happens, we can react. We have personal call and all those kind of things.
Yeah, and we have a lot of events and things that we trigger for our monitoring. In fact, my Slack channel is filled with all sorts of events that come in from various things, and we're always kind of tracking things down and trying to make sure that if we see some event that happened out in production or even in staging environment, that we quickly track it down and make sure that.
And I noticed that we're quite nimble, so our sprint is 2 weeks.
Yeah. We do 2-week sprints, kind of a fairly standard agile process.
Right.
We're kind of trying to replan every couple of weeks and allow ourselves to take in feedback from customers, take in feedback from the marketing teams and yourself, to try to be very responsive to what we're building. Sometimes, like this multi-agent AI, this is actually a several month project. It's kind of unusual for us to roll out such a large project. But most of the things we do, we try to do on a.
But you were building kind of the infrastructure to allow us to. So it's a big lift.
It's a big lift, and like I said, now you'll start to see these agents rolling out every couple of weeks with sort of new functionality around the product. So
if somebody has any ideas about new agents,
sure,
let us know.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about how we are onboarding customer and how we prepare the environment. So customers, each one of them, it's a multi-tenant environment. Each one has a logical separation in terms of the SD. What about the computing? How do we do computing for the prompts?
Yeah, I mean, we have multiple servers running in production for all of our different instance types, and it's really just kind of load balancing across things. So we'll just we have a flexible setup where if we start to get under load for any particular one of our nodes, we'll just roll up another server and launch it. So and I think like for our ML processing servers, for instance, we can have up to 6 of those that'll launch at any given time in order to handle processing loads. So it does, customers are using the same environment, but yeah, we're dynamically scaling it up and down in order to.
And then the tasks are separated. So the prompt that I'm asking, it's separated by itself, and my data is separated, all of it.
Right. And I mean, it's one of the core things, like every spot throughout the product is always carrying around the tenant ID, the customer account ID, and just making sure that every single thing at every layer is isolated from each other. And so you really have to go out of your way to try to like step across, even in any of those codes, step across boundaries between code, because everything is validated at basically every level in the product.
Let's address this question about training now, because we hear a lot. Do we use data for training? And of course, let's actually distinguish what is training and what is contextualization, because sometimes people kind of mix those two.
Yeah, I mean, we made a decision a while ago. We actually originally did some experiments, training some models, doing some fine tuning of models. We were never using customer data, but we were using some data that was available out on the internet, like SOC 2 reports and things like that, as some of the things we were using for fine tuning models. We kind of made a decision to not do that, and instead just kind of stay focused on using more sort of generic approaches to things. Now we do, like you said, when we are asking any sort of AI-based question, we are pulling data in from that particular
and contextualizing the question.
Yes, contextualize the question, but we never pull in anything across account boundaries. We never pull in anything from another account. So we just kind of made a decision pretty early on that was important, because we wouldn't want any, even if it's, from fine tuning down the road, we wouldn't want any information from one account to leak
into another. Yeah. So contextualization, indexing, yes. Training, no. Right. And even when we make a call to the backend, to the LLM OpenAI, then it's an enterprise agreement. So we just ask the question and then we drop the data and they forget about it. They don't use it for.
Yeah, that's right. We don't leave any information inside of OpenAI. Everything is just in the current context window for that call. We might upload a document that'll get deleted at the end of the session, but that's about it. And so, yeah, for the most part, everything is being maintained in our systems, in our AWS infrastructure, and then just
limited to that account.
Yeah, limited to that account. Then on demand, we'll pull context in from a particular account to hand OpenAI for processing.
Okay. I think that was pretty much all we had for today. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to say? Where are we heading with the development?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, expect to see a lot more AI functionality getting rolled out as we have this new framework in place. I think you'll start to see more sort of co-pilot windows in different areas of the product as we're adding new functionality in. So we're rolling that out sometime soon. We're doing work, I think I mentioned a little bit, on more evidence gathering and evidence organization and evidence mapping to controls. You'll see some of that functionality coming out. We've also been putting some focus onto third-party risk management. So a couple of different areas there.
Right.
We're looking, we just recently did release kind of an update to our risk modeling and our risk kind of dashboard reporting. That's actually also coming out this week.
That'll be really cool, actually. I saw it and it's awesome.
Yeah, so that should be cool. So yeah, more charting, more reporting. You'll see a lot more AI functionality getting rolled out across the product to help with like point questions you might need answered, like even, hey, I've just looked at a list of my evidence. I've narrowed it down to a little bit. Now I want to ask some questions about that evidence, things like that, to higher level sort of evidence mapping, to then more detailed analysis, like this policy design analysis. And we're looking at other things in that area as well.
Speaking of AI, our folks are using Copilot in development. What is your philosophy around vibe code, using and vibe coding? Yeah,
it's interesting. And it's something we've absolutely encouraged as much as possible in our development teams, is to use AI to develop. In fact, where we've seen maybe some of the biggest benefits has been in our integrations team, because some of those integrations are fairly boilerplate,
right?
It's all public APIs, things like that. And so getting AI to generate almost a complete integration with just a couple of prompts, we found that that's actually completely possible. So that's definitely sped up development in that team quite a bit. And everyone else is using it to various extents. I've personally used it myself in writing a little bit of code for the product as well. I mean, it's very helpful. Sometimes it also is very annoying. So you just have to be careful. And there is a danger of introducing code that like the person who wrote it hasn't even really looked at. And so then when there's bugs in the system, it can be very difficult to track them down because you didn't even write that code. You had Copilot
Go to AI to ask what is the bug. Yeah.
and you're like, sometimes it's just hard to track down. So that we have seen some downsides of that as well, but we're using it very extensively.
In general, when does it work? Like, what are the criteria that you say, okay, if it fits those criteria, it's good to use, but if it fits those criteria, avoid?
Yeah, I mean, for small isolated problems, it's great. Like if you write me a function that's going to do X and you can describe the function at a high level, it's going to write it. It's going to be great. It's really when you have something that's a more complex.
With a lot of dependencies.
A lot of dependencies, especially with legacy code. Our company's been around for over 4 years now. And so there is some code like, okay, it was written a few years ago. Legacy code. We still have to pull some of that back in and operate on it. And so sometimes things like that don't work all that well. You find that it doesn't quite understand what the other side of the platform is doing. So you have to be careful. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting better every year for sure.
So, awesome. Thank you so much, David. I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation. If you have any questions, just go to our website. You know how to contact us and we can have David again. Thank you.